Pope Francis has recently approved blessings for same-sex unions, sparking mixed outrage. In fact, some leaders in Africa say this stands against their traditional values, while others from the queer community are asking for an even bolder step. This decision is seen as a radical shift for a church that's trying to be more inclusive while also adhering to its strict ban on gay marriage. Let's continue with our reaction, this time bring in Dean Hutton, who's an educator and queer rights activist, and joins us now via our video link. Dean, it's great to have you in the program. Thanks very much indeed for making time to speak to us. You know, people do see this as some kind of shift. Perhaps the word radical is a bit of a emotive term, so to speak. But I wonder, as a start, if you too see this at least as a symbol of the church heading in the right direction.
Absolutely. I really do believe that the Catholic Church appears to be on a journey to repair the damage of rigid ideological stances that have hurt so many vulnerable people and families, and in recentering love as a central doctrine of the Church. For me, it's a positive leap to help families accept and celebrate their queer children, helping us to be more nurturing and accepting of ourselves and others.
And that's important, right? Because attitudes, at the very least, are, if you like, the foundation of the church. And from what you've just said, my next question was going to be, to what extent you reckon that attitudes themselves will change? Because what takes place in the Vatican, among the theologians, etc., is one thing, but the attitudes in the pews, some people might say, may tell a very different story.
Well, for me, Pope Francis is the head of probably the most progressive, compassionate, and courageous administration of the oldest institution in the Western world. For me, I am keen to see what happens with an institution with 2,000 years of experience in human affairs can affect full social justice in a time of great revelation when so many of us are awakening to the realities of our world, to our personal power. A policy surrounded by an ethics of human rights can only be positive for everyone and provide a leading example for the constituents of the Catholic Church.
Yeah. Of course, what has also come with this is fierce pushback and, people who, in fact, are even warning of some kind of schism within the church. And I suppose very few people will be surprised by that. There were always going to be conservative, let's call them corners of the church that see this as a deviation from what is Catholicism and what is not. I wonder how much of, attention that should potentially get at this time, especially because upon closer examination, many people will tell you that Pope Francis actually hasn't preached any new rules. I mean, the idea of people getting blessings has always been there within the church. Perhaps what he's done is place a different emphasis on it, but it really is what the church has always taught.
Well, the fact is that to speak very openly about the issues and the acceptance and the possibility of blessings beyond this kind of moral perfection that is often touted around Christianity, about a so-called purity, and these are the kind of things that conservatives are often obsessed with, being in people's bedrooms, about being in people's lives, and not actually following the doctrines of, the man who is supposed to be born tomorrow, the great Palestinian Jesus Christ.
And that's an interesting way to frame it, because in some churches, Jesus is being, put together as an anti-establishment person, right, who never really followed the rules of the day and paved a new path for the underdogs, so to speak. But there's different ways of also engaging in activism, Dean, and art is certainly one of them. My understanding is that you're also quite involved in that space.
Yeah, of course. But, for me, my solidarity with oppressed people comes out of my queer identity. That for me, there can be no concept of love without justice. That for me, if you think of the way in which we frame our moral stances, our ethical stances, absolutely we must side on those that are oppressed. As we realize our own personal power, how linked it is to sensitive community.
I can almost
I also think I would really like to just expand on that. That for me, there can be no global LGBTIQ plus rights without addressing exactly what is happening now in Palestine to people of all sexualities and genders. That queer rights are not just a special bundle, a special present for queer people. That it is an investment in love for all people. And that as we're sitting now, there's also ethnic fascist state basing a religious doctrine around who is more human than another. And that is currently bombing hospitals, schools, refugee camps of people with all spectrums of gender and sexual identities. And these kinds of issues, for artists like me, for educators, are very important to remember that we cannot be more human than any other human. And that for us to be free, so many others need to be free too. That there is no freedom without everyone being free.
Yeah. You know, I can almost hear some people, even queer activists, asking why it's so important for the community to get, let's call it validation for lack of a better term, from religious groupings, including institutions like the Catholic Church, as opposed to creating your own kind of spaces outside of these institutions themselves. You know, it's that question around why it's so important to fight even from within, as opposed to creating a new world for yourself outside of these religious groupings.
The fact is that queer people exist within society, whether we're open or not, whether we have the courage to stand openly queer, openly accepting of ourselves. Often religion has been used and weaponized against people who exhibit different traits as a way of making people subject to power. And for me, what I can, from how I read particularly there's what's happening in the Catholic Church at the moment around issues of climate change, around the Pope taking very strong stance against the exploitation of this very precious planet that we all live on, that we cannot escape. No matter what the billionaires are trying to do, we live here. We need to live together, and we need to find ways to live peacefully and economically and ecologically fair within climate justice, within queer rights, within the rights of women and children. There is no struggle that the LGBTQ, as the meme goes, cannot be directly linked to, because we exist within all these spaces, and we cannot use just one kind of slim line around what our freedom entails without including the freedoms of all people, of all loving people, and to bring a more compassionate, kinder, more equal world, not only for humans, but for the animals, for the plants, because we need to move on from an idea of a human supremacy into a world which many indigenous people have always known is here to support us and not to be exploited.
Right. You know, as we're speaking, I'm reminded of a book I came across when I was still a student by Sia Kumalo. It's titled, You Have to Be Gay to Know God. And essentially, Sia uses his own life experience being in the army, his first interaction with intimacy, etc., to draw the parallels between religion, its colonial history, and essentially being queer on the continent. And my question is getting around whether or not you envision, or rather see the culmination of a church that is aware of these different things and begins to marry them more comfortably than they have in our history. Are you confident that that is the church that is starting to emerge, perhaps slowly, but emerging nonetheless?
You know, absolutely. I do think that if you follow the doctrine of Christ and the actual words that are written in the Bible, he is always constantly talking about love. And and how we each one of us is divine, and that love is divine. So once we move away from the demagogues of the people in power trying to assert a certain narrative, and go actually back to the words of the Christ, go back to the words of the Buddha, go back to the words of Muhammad, you know, if we go back to the prophets, and not to those that want to profit off our pain, off our suffering, in dividing us, in removing us from our divine heritage, we can shift this world. I think that there's a massive amount of fear of change, but I know that as a person who had changed so much from my own history, like working through the pain of various violences, that you can move to a space of compassionate, kind love, which is not about possessing, it's not about obsession, it's not about division. I don't want to, I don't want to come out as a demagogue myself around like issues of love, but I really know that in my own life I have been able to shift ideas of violence through like learning what it means to have rights and responsibilities to my community, to my positionality even as a white South African, about overcoming things like white supremacy and working every day to be of service and to perform love as an action, not as a concept.
Yeah, absolutely. It's complex, it's nuanced, it's layered, but it's so important. Dean Hutton, thanks for speaking to us about this. Appreciate your time. Dean is a queer rights activist. Once again, thanks very much indeed.